in by clicking the link in the stream's description. The professor wants to hear from you.
Beginnings on the cusp. Not too old to adjust. Old dog, new tricks. Remember, I was just a pup. Something dirty in my cup. Clean soul, good car.
Isn't it lovely? I ain't looking back, I focus on what's in front of me. Everybody dates a number, but I'm still here luckily. I know that God got me, so I'm in good company. Isn't it lovely?
Welcome, and thank you for joining me. I am Professor Bear, and this is A Bear's Thought. And today, our sponsor is none other than Chops Cards and Print On Design. If you always wanted to have your own trading card of you wrestling, playing football, basketball, whatever, Chops Card is the way to go. Their professionalism and their great quality match with any other quality card you can think of. And just because you know the professor, we're going to give you a special deal. We're going to give you 15% off. Yes, 15% off your entire order. I mean, where can you beat that? You're getting great quality and 15% off. There's no one else that can touch that. That is Chops Cards and Print On Design, your spot for great work. Now, joining me around the campfire today is an author that I've just recently have been introduced to myself. He has tremendous work, and I think that you as my fans would love to learn more about him and some of the books he has written. Today is my guest, Aaron Douglas. Sir, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Professor Bear. Thank you so much for having me. Your intro, you got me motivated. After this, I'm going to go over to Chops Cards, and I'm going to see if they can't put together a trading card of me typing away at a keyboard. You got me hyped up.
I'm telling you, they do fantastic work. Fantastic. But today, I want to, I was blessed that one of my fellow podcasters, Mike D of Wrestling from the 313, check him out. If you don't, something's wrong with you. But he told me about your great interview. And for me, especially as being called the professor, I do love to learn a lot about the history of wrestling and different things. So I was very happy to hear that there are real good quality books out there that talk about Black wrestlers that I did not know existed in the early days. Before we dive into that, can you tell how you got into wrestling?
Well, first of all, shout out to Mike D. Mike D is a good guy, and Mike is just looking out for another guy from the 313, even though I was only from the 313 until I was 3 years old, at which point we moved north of 8 Mile Road to Southfield. how did I get into wrestling? I got into wrestling because I clicked on wrestling one Saturday. I was 6 or 7 years old, and I saw Randy Savage drop an elbow onto somebody's chest, and I said, and I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And from that point on, I was hooked on pro wrestling.
Oh, wow. So from that point, how did you transition into wanting to write about wrestling?
Okay. It's a long story that I'm going to try to keep short. I wasn't very good and I need to be careful when I say that. I didn't have a strong interest in anything else academically outside of writing. And I was always, when I got into the University of Michigan, I spent way too much time in the computer lab, reading match reports from Dave Meltzer, reading articles written by Greg Oliver, learning about the books written by Scott Teal, reading match reviews written by Phil Schneider and Dean Rasmussen on DeathValleyDriver.com, on the message boards. And I was fascinated that there were people who were either able to make a living writing about pro wrestling or who were just given the opportunity to write about pro wrestling. So I always thought it would be a cool thing to do. And initially I wanted to be a television reporter. I didn't think writing about wrestling or reporting on wrestling was something I was going to get an opportunity to do. But when I was in the master's program at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism, they would assign us to these different beats every quarter. So you might get assigned to the urban beat, you might get assigned to the legal beat. And of all things, during the quarter when I had business journalism, I got assigned to the entertainment beat. And I went to our editor, Joe, and I said, could sports be considered entertainment? And he said, sure, sports could be considered entertainment. And I said, okay, but could pro wrestling be considered entertainment? And he said, absolutely, pro wrestling could be considered entertainment. So that was my opportunity to head over to a Windy City wrestling show, which was Sam DeCero's promotion. This was their big event of the year. They had AJ Styles there. They had Abyss there. They had Christopher Daniels there. This was 2005. And so I made the acquaintance of the wrestlers. I wrote at least one piece related to Windy City Wrestling that got published in the Chicago Defender. And then when we did the Medill Report special, my classmate, Kate Ekman, who got the honor of directing the Medill Report's end of quarter special, she assigned me the role of anchoring the show, with the honor of anchoring the show, which I appreciated. And we all had to come up with our feature segments. And the feature segment I opted to do and got approved. So it's not like I blindsided. It's not like I blindsided my professors with this, but Acid Jazz was one of the indie wrestlers who was wrestling for Windy City Pro Wrestling at the time. He was a school teacher throughout the week, but also moonlighted as a pro wrestler. So we got to interview some of his coworkers, interview a student or two, and then we got to follow him around for a few of his matches. And so I was able to also cover a Windy City Pro Wrestler for my Medill Reports feature. So I never thought I'd get another opportunity to do anything related to pro wrestling and journalism or entertainment ever again. But many years later, when I was writing for Movoto Real Estate out in California, we were putting together these pieces. And one of the, I suggested that we interview different athletes about the 10 best places that they ever played, or like in Isaiah Thomas's case, I interviewed Isaiah Thomas. This is Detroit Pistons Isaiah Thomas. 10 best places he ever played basketball. And I'd made the acquaintance of Kurt Angle. I actually have a really cool photo of me in Kurt Angle's house in his office where he's giving me the ankle lock. I can show it to you later. But I interviewed Kurt Angle on his 10 favorite places to wrestle. And so we got that published. And those contacts I carried with me into later consulting, writing work for the West Michigan Sports Commission. And I interviewed a few different wrestlers there. And I finally interviewed Dan Severn, another good Michigan guy. And I only needed 20 minutes of his time. He gave me closer to an hour and 20 minutes. And I figured, man, he's so profusive with the speech. If he could give someone that kind of time on a regular basis, you could get a book out of him. Well, he stayed in touch. He mentioned wanting to write a book, and I was prepared for it. And I said, well, if you gave me an hour or so of your time every day for 2 weeks, we could probably get a book published. So the first book that I was ever the co-author of was Dan Severn's autobiography. And that was in 2016. And I've been averaging a book a year ever since then.
Wow. Man, that is amazing. And especially just to be able not only talking and meeting Kurt Angle, but Dan Severn is one of the guys that I followed, especially in that period when I'm a big NWA guy.
Mm-hmm.
So the NWA had fell on hard times, and he was their world champion, and I loved him, and also followed him through the UFC. So I was a massive fan of his work, and that is just amazing. Plus, you mentioned talking to AJ Styles and me. They're some of the best wrestlers in the modern era.
Well, I didn't. Let's see. I spent more time in that setting. When I met those guys, I pulled up to the building. This is embarrassing, but I pulled up to the building. I was waiting for Sam DeCero knew I was coming. I was waiting to be let in the back door. Larry Zbyszko is out back smoking a cigarette, and I blanked on his name for some reason. It was the most embarrassing thing in the world because, I mean, it's Larry Zbyszko. No one else looks like him. And I'm staring at him. He's staring at me. I know who he is, but I can't remember his name. And he just looks annoyed or disgusted with me that he's not getting recognized. And he flicks his cigarette down and then walks into the building. And then like 20 minutes later, I'm in there and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's Larry Zbyszko. So I walked up to him and I shook his hand. I said, living legend, I am so sorry that I didn't introduce myself outside. And he broke into a huge grin. And from that moment on, he was cool. AJ Styles, I shook his hand while he was on the phone, while he was sitting on the stairs in the hallway, probably talking to his wife on the cell phone. That was the extent of that. I talked to Abyss at the vending machine when this giant guy, but I talked to Abyss at the vending machine when he was talking about the grape soda he just bought out of the vending machine and how great and flavorful it was. I'm like, okay, sure, man, I'll try it. I don't think I bought the grape soda, but I mean, that was cool that he was even talking to me. And then Christopher Daniels, I said hi to him when I was standing over by the merch table before the show started and he was laying his T-shirts out. But yeah, that was the extent of the interaction I had with those guys. I didn't get to interview any of them for the piece, but 20 years later now, it's cool to say that I was able to interact with them at a small show in Chicago 2 decades ago.
Oh yeah, I could just imagine. I try to, when I get a chance to go to different shows, I try to not mark out in front of wrestlers, but I mean, the way you see them is like, you are a superstar. Oh my God, you talk. So I definitely get that understanding of like, wait a minute, you're talking about grape soda? What?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but that, like, all of the all of the mark out stuff has been drained out of me since, I mean, out of necessity, because they want you to act like a regular guy. I'm being invited into their homes. I spent multiple nights in the guest room of Brian Blair's house, both while we were working on the book, and then when I just came down to Florida, if I had business there, Brian would offer up his guest room for me to stay in. In fact, I did a book signing down in Florida, and Brian didn't even go. He wasn't invited, but he offered up his guest room for me to stay in. I mean, my ultimate, my ultimate mark out weekend. I mean, it would have been a mark out weekend if I was 12 or 13 years old, but I've thankfully grown out of it. When I came down to work on Steve Kern's book, and I've finished, Mike Rotunda and I have finished his book. We're just figuring out when it's going to be published, and if we're going to try to find an outside publisher for it. But that same weekend, I went down to Steve Kern's. He's got all of his memorabilia laid out on his dining room table. So we're going through all that, trying to figure out what should go in the book. He says, "Who do you think should do the foreword for this thing?" And I said, I don't know. You have so many friends. Maybe it would be good if we got somebody who was, on the young side. And 20 minutes later, he's handing me his phone, and he said, "Okay, so CM Punk wants you to call him. And here's his phone number. Here's his email address. He wants you to get in touch with him so you can coordinate him working on the forward to the book. And who do you think for the afterword?" And I said, I don't know. You didn't train CM Punk, did you? And he said, "No, not really." And I said, "Okay, who do you think would be good?" So he sends a few more texts and says, "Okay, Natty Neidhart wants you to call her too." So that's cool in and of itself. So I spend the night in his guest room, which has alligator stuff, because it's Skinner, is alligator stuff all over the room. So the next day I'm still at his house, but Brian Blair wants to take me out to dinner. So Kern drives me over to Brian so Brian can take me out to dinner. Brian drives me back and drops me over at Kern's house. And then in the morning, I get up and Kern drives me all the way. I mean, it's 45 minutes away, but Kern drives me all the way to Mike Rotunda's house. And I mean, if you know Mike Rotunda, proud University of Syracuse graduate, two-sport athlete. I mean, that was his gimmick in NWA WCW. And I have a certificate in project management from Syracuse, so it's not like I bought this stuff just for the occasion. But I pull up, I've got the Syracuse University hat and sweatshirt on. I come downstairs in the morning, Kern looks at me and just chuckles and says, "I see what you're trying to do." But so we get in the car, we head out there. Rotunda's driving around in a golf cart. His property is like adjacent to a golf course, but he's driving around in a golf cart. He sees me, and the first thing he says is, "I like your shirt." I said, "Yeah, I'll bet you do." So I go in there. He's got all his memorabilia laid out on the table, like some of his high school stuff, some of his punt, pass, and kick stuff from when he was a teenager or younger than that, when he did the national competition. And as we're working on that, we went off into some room of the house. I forget why, but then we heard the door open, and I go into the living room to see who came in, and Barry Windham is standing in the middle of the room. And that's his brother-in-law, of course, who lives more or less down the street. So Barry came just to hang out for a little while, and I end up doing interviews with Mike in his man cave, and under the TV is the briefcase and hat and glove of Blackjack Mulligan, Mike's father-in-law, that he used to carry around. And and also, of course, this is back when Bray Wyatt, Wyndham Rotunda, was still alive. I did not get to meet him before he passed away. But Mike was saying, "Hey, I'm gonna drive you out to show you the new property Wyndham just bought." But on the way, we passed by the house that Wyndham and JoJo live in, and Mike's pulling up, and Mike's acting like he's 10 years old, and he's like, "Yeah, look at that car he bought. Look at that car he bought." I mean, so he's like half stalking his own son's property, giddy over the cars that he recently purchased, and I said to Mike, like, is it weird that we're just sitting out here? Like, should we go say hi before somebody says anything? And that evening, Stephanie came home. Stephanie Wyndham Rotunda came home, and she cooked dinner for us. It was grouper. It was delicious. I made a whole bunch of Captain Mike Rotunda jokes because you remember that gimmick where he was the ship's captain.
Yes,
but,
yes.
Like he's big time into boating and fishing. That's where that whole thing came from.
Oh, okay.
And then so I spent the night at the Rotunda's house, and then it got up in the morning, did some more interviews, and then he drove me all the way to the airport. So that was, I didn't mean to take up so much of the show with that.
No.
I mean, I'm just saying that was those are the sorts of opportunities you get, I guess, when you become accepted by the wrestlers and you offer them something that's of value to them.
Definitely. That was a great story. It's one of those things that puts me in mind of anytime I meet a wrestler, get a chance to talk to him, I always put in my mind to be respectful and let them understand, yes, I am a fan, but I'm not trying to annoy you. Just want to, if you got a second, pick your brain, let you know how I'm a fan and everything. And just to let them know how much they meant to me in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to talk for so many people, let them know how much they mean to fans in general.
Yeah. Even though I'm now friends with a few of them, even when I meet new wrestlers, I always express my appreciation for what they did, because they do put their bodies on the line. They put relationships on the line, and it is a very tough existence. Brian Blair has back problems. He's had multiple surgeries since I met him just a few years ago. Kern has had his share of health issues, unfortunately. And Mike Rotunda just had a hip replacement. And I mean, he probably still has complications back from when he broke his neck wrestling in WWE back in, I think it was 95. It's just a tough life all the way around.
Yes, definitely. So tell us, you told us the story of your first book, and
you're right. I should be doing book promotion. I'm sorry. I got carried away.
Well, no, and I think to learn more because you're giving us an insight to what we would never get a chance to see and understand too. There's so much good understanding of how wrestlers are just human beings, because we see them as a big giant superhero, and they're just down to earth regular people.
Absolutely, at least the ones I've met. Yeah.
Yes. So tell us, after this book, what made you decide to go to the next book about wrestling?
Oh, well, that's easy enough. I was wrapping up Severn's. I shouldn't say I was wrapping up Severn's book. We'd wrapped up interviews, and I was staying in an Airbnb. This is back when my wife was living in Washington, D.C. I was staying in an Airbnb, and I usually work out religiously. I hadn't worked out in 2 weeks since Severin and I started working on this. So I was finally heading into, I think it was a 24-hour fitness or a Snap Fitness or one of those for the first time in what for me 2 weeks is forever for me. And I got in there and I threw on the Steve Austin's podcast, and the guest was Hornswoggle. And I was laughing the entire time. He was telling some of the funniest stories I'd ever heard. And as soon as I got done with my workout, I got back to the Airbnb. I looked him up on Twitter. He had his booking email there. I emailed him. I said, I just listened to you on Steve Austin's podcast. Your stories are fantastic. I think that you should do a book. I'm working on Dan Severn's book right now, but when I'm done with that, I would love to help you work on a book of your own. I took a shower, came back out, got dressed, checked my computer. He'd already replied and said, let's do it. So that's how number 2 got started. And I think I need to be careful how I say this, because I think I've improved dramatically over time, especially between book 1 and book 4. So this isn't to say I was competent at writing, at co-authoring books yet, but it's a whole lot easier to make a pitch to somebody when you already have some third party verification that you know what you're doing. So I'm sure it would have been one thing if I said, hey, I'd love to help you write a book. And he said, well, how many books have you written? 0. But when I said, hey, I'm working with Dan Severn on his, and I'd like to help you with yours, that probably went a long way toward establishing credibility.
Oh, definitely.
So that's how we got book 2 underway.
Cool. So with his book, and with Hornswoggle, I always put in, okay, he's I don't know the proper term.
You can say midget. He prefers being called a midget.
Okay. With a midget, I know he has a lot of different challenges to come and everything, but he's a wonderful athlete. Like you said, funny, just very entertaining. With his book versus Dan's, did you feel like it was a big difference or just similar?
Oh, it was very different, because with Dan, we start off with Dan talking about the fact that by the time he graduated from high school, he was the most highly recruited amateur wrestler in wrestling history, because his junior year, he wins the state championship in Michigan, and he goes undefeated. His senior year, he repeats as state champion. He goes undefeated, and he pins every single opponent in under 1 minute. So he's just this absolute juggernaut. And Arizona State, in recruiting him, the one thing that they were lacking was a club program that would enable high-level training in wrestling year-round as opposed to just in season. They invented the club wrestling program at Arizona State just to make it a more attractive place for Dan Severn to land. So with Severn, you have this major sports intro, and that permeates everything that Severn does, because he takes sports and he takes wrestling and the intersection of the two very, very seriously. It starts off very somber because he had a brother who committed suicide when he was very young. But transitioning from there to his interest in wrestling, he starts off as a huge Ultimate Warrior fan. So he watched, he had an Ultimate Warrior birthday cake one year. He says he watched WrestleMania 6 Ultimate Challenge Warrior versus Hogan until they completely wore the tape out and it snapped. But by the time he delves into wrestling, and I think he was trained by Ken Kennedy, was one of the people who trained him. And he goes by the name Short Stack, the man, the myth, the midget. But he views himself as an even smaller version of Rey Mysterio Jr. He doesn't want to be a midget. He doesn't want to do midget wrestling spots. He doesn't want to run through the referee's legs or bite his opponent on the butt. He doesn't want to do any of those things. And he really lucks out in getting the role that he got, because there were multiple there's Tommy Dreamer is the guy who left him the voicemail message, and Hornswoggle didn't think he was going to get a role as the midget that the WWE was looking for. They tried out multiple guys, and he said everything he did horribly, and plus he totally embarrassed himself when he got the tryout, because he broke every single rule of backstage decorum. He was going around taking pictures of people and getting autographs. He's acting like a total fan, which you're told not to do.
Right.
So he said, I screwed up, but it was totally worth it. I got to see all my heroes, and now I'm never going to see them again. And he goes and he goes back to his job stocking shelves at Target, and then he gets multiple phone calls from Tommy Dreamer, and he thinks it's somebody messing with him. And finally, he gets one final message from Tommy Dreamer, who says, Dylan, please call me back, or we're going to have to hire the other midget. Thanks. Bye. So he calls back and he gets the job. But that's the sort of humor that you get from Hornswoggle's book. His entry, the character of his entry into wrestling is just very different from Dan Severn's.
Yeah, man, you talking about a total opposite.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing I always admire about Hornswoggle, that he seems to have fun with everything. It's like some people you can tell they are forcing it. With him, it's like he seems naturally into whatever he's doing.
Well, he thought part of that is because Dylan thought he had the best job in the world, because when he was being featured and he understood that he got a lot of hate, Hornswoggle's on here again, he's ruining the show, this is horrible. He said, I didn't care. I got to interact with Trump. I got to interact with Snoop Dogg. I got to interact with the Muppets. And he has Muppets tattoos all over his body. He's such an obsessed Muppets fan. But every single celebrity guest, Ozzy Osbourne, he got to interact with all of these folks that most people could only dream of. Most people could only dream of interacting with one of them. He got to interact with these guys every single week. He got to be an unofficial member of DX, or the mascot, or however it was that they termed him. But yeah, so when you say he looks like he was having fun, yes, he was having a blast, because he seriously was living a dream.
Oh, well, boy, I know I would give I wouldn't give my son, but I would give close to my son to have that opportunity.
He also tells a story about meeting The Rock, and the Rock thought he was a Make-A-Wish kid who was hanging out backstage.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh.
That hurt his feelings.
I would say it would, but you cannot beat that for something funny, though. So we'll go to your third book. What is your third book?
The third book was Bugsy McGraw. The third book. Ooh, okay. How about we go an hour and a half and I'll just get in trouble with my wife? That'll be okay. The third book was Bugsy McGraw. My friend Kenny Casanova, who has taught me more about putting a book together and formatting it than anyone else. And I owe that guy so much. Kenny was absolutely slammed with projects. He had Vaders, he had Sabu's, he had Just Incredibles. He had Brutus Beefcakes. Kamala's book had already been out, but he had several book projects he was working on. And he said, Bugsy McGraw wants a book. I don't have the time to do it. Is it something that you would be interested in? And I said, yes, absolutely, for two reasons. Number one, if nothing else, it was an opportunity for me to learn something and to get better. And I'd never put my own book together, start to finish, doing the formatting, really doing the chapter breaks, purchasing the barcode in the ISBN as something as minor as that, designing the cover, even though the cover is horrible, but it was an opportunity to do that. And yeah, it was just an opportunity to get an education. And knowing that this was going to be a completely independent project, it was an opportunity for me to relax, but also to understand that there was no one else coming to save this project and that it would live and die with what I'd opted to do. And Bugsy was great to work with. That was a case where I think I interviewed him once a week for 20 or so weeks, something like that, transcribing as we went, editing as we went. And when it was all over with, put the book together, released it, and that wound up being my first book that was a finalist for Wrestling Observer Book of the Year, which was a surprise to me. But the other reason I was interested in working on Bugsy's book is because my mom is from the Bahamas. The first wrestling show I ever saw in my life was a wrestling event in the Bahamas when I was 9 years old. Main event was Dusty Rhodes against Big Steel Man Fred Ottman, aka Tugboat and Typhoon. In the main event, Bugsy was on that show, and Steve Kern was on that show. Mike Graham was on that show. Raven wrestling, I think, as Scotty Flamingo was on that show. The Nasty Boys were on that show. John Laurinaitis was on that show.
Wow.
It was so I'd always had a dream of working on a book about the Bahamas, about wrestling in the Bahamas. And Bahamas, you can't tell the story about wrestling in the Bahamas without learning about and understanding wrestling in the Florida territory, because their stories are completely intertwined. And so over the course of working on Bugsy's book project, I was also, in the background of that, I was also meeting and interviewing several other wrestlers, including Steve Kern, Brian Blair, Rocky Johnson, later on, Mike Rotunda, Joe Malenko, Tyree Pride. I wound up, now I'm sort of talking about book 5, but I wound up interviewing 40 people for the Bahamas book along the way. So I was never working on just one book at a time. I was usually working on at least 2 books simultaneously, and that made it easier to pop these things out.
Wow. So, so how many books do you have in total?
How many books released?
Yes.
9 released, 10 completed. I mentioned Rotunda's. I have one more book that I'm working on, which I will not disclose what it is. Primarily because I am, this isn't me being superstitious. This is me attempting to be wary of myself. I know a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people hop on social media and say, I'm working on this wrestler's book, or I'm working on a wrestling book that explores this topic. And 3, 4, 5 years go by and it never comes out. If I tell somebody I'm working on a wrestling book, it's 99% done. That's the only time I would be comfortable mentioning it. And the other thing is when folks tend to make these announcements, hey, I'm working on this. First of all, you're inviting people to bug you once a week. How's the book going? When's the book coming out? Give me an update on the book. And I don't need that in my life. And
Right.
and also you make the book announcement and you get 200 likes and you start feeling good about yourself, almost as if you've completed the book already and you haven't done one thing. And you feel so good about it that maybe you want to coast on that feeling for a while, and you end up not actually doing the work. And I'd rather do the work than let people know, and then I can coast on the feeling of success such that it is for the rest of my life.
Right. Now makes way better sense. And like you said, the bug of, hey, how's the book coming? When it's coming out? And put
That's the worst.
pressure on you. And I think sometimes when you announce something before you truly have it done, you are like you said, it's almost like a jinx, and you help people. I hate to say use the word steal, but borrow your ideal and the make water it down. And I definitely understand why you go the route you do. And plus, you're being successful with doing it that way.
Yeah, I don't want to jinx myself, but also, and part of it is me thriving on paranoia, right? And realistically, there was nobody working on a Bahamas pro wrestling book. Like there was no one else working on that subject matter. When we start talking about the latter books, like there's no way that there was anybody working on a Jack Claiborne and Rufus Jones book, although along the way there are plenty of people doing mediocre Black pro wrestling historical scholarship, and at times I've been that guy too. I'm not just pointing fingers outward. But I when it comes to the process of working on these things, I have in my head that there are at least 3 other people working on these things at the exact same time I'm working on it. And if I don't stay focused and I don't get in my daily hour of research and writing during my free time, then somebody else is going to beat me to it. Or what can be just as bad is they're going to put out a version and it's going to be worse, but they will have spoiled the market for that subject matter by putting out an inferior product. So I need to be diligent about working on it, and I need to make sure it's of superior quality, and I need to get it out as quickly as possible, because otherwise somebody's going to get it out first. It's not going to be that good, and nobody's going to care that I came with a more factually accurate and more robust version of that content.
And again, that makes total sense. And I think immediately when you started talking like that, I started thinking about myself and being a podcaster. There are thousands of wrestling podcasts. What sets mine apart from other people? What do I offer that fans would enjoy to come back and listen and things? So I definitely understand your premise and your thought process on it. one particular thing I definitely wanted to discuss is the book on the Black wrestlers and the history. Could you delve more into that?
Sure. It's hard to talk about one book without talking about the other book simultaneously. But the general idea here was twofold. First of all, the wrestling authors that I look up to are the guys who could do everything. And the example that I usually provide is John Cosper, who does a ton of great work, especially, I mean, he's written about a ton of folks and topics. I don't think he would mind me saying that he probably most enjoys topics related to Tennessee, or not Tennessee, to Kentucky. He loves Kentucky as a state, as a wrestling territory, and he loves the wrestlers who spent time there. And he does a lot of work covering OVW even now. But John, he can do great autobiographies as a co-author. He can do great biographies that he independently researches himself. He can do great comprehensive wrestling territory books. And so, I mean, I think most people are like this. When you think about the people you look up to, you usually look up to them because they've done something difficult or because they've done a series of impressive things. Like that's what makes them somebody that you aspire to be like. And so if you want to be regarded the same way or thought of or mentioned in the same sentence, you kind of have to get around to doing the hard things that they're doing, or that's never going to happen. So done plenty of wrestling autobiographies. What else is out there? Well, territorial book, Bahamas Wrestling History, did it as best I can. Okay, I had never done a biography, and two guys I settled on were Gentleman Jack Claiborne and Rufus Jones, two black wrestlers who emerged during the 1930s. One was the archetype for a heroic babyface. The other was the archetype for, he was probably the top heel in the Midwest, like full stop, no racial modifier or qualifier needed. The top heel in the Midwest for 13 years straight, pretty much. And he is the guy most responsible for the proliferation of the stereotype that black wrestlers did a lot of headbutts. And what ends up happening, I'm sort of giving it away here, but what ends up happening, because Jack Claiborne is the 6'1", hyper athletic, high drop kicking guy. And originally he was jumping Jack Claiborne. But he ends up wrestling in Hawaii for promoter Al Karasik. And while he's there, he starts borrowing liberally from Rufus Jones' headbutting routine and starts throwing jumping headbutts into his act. And so 1948, 1949, Claiborne is this boxer shuffling, flying drop kicking, jumping years 30 years before Tony Atlas and Rocky Johnson are getting that on national television. And certainly, I mean, don't get me wrong, Rocky Johnson was getting that on TV in different territories plenty, but as far as on national television, he broke the mold with that act, and he gets zero credit for it, in part because he aged and deteriorated so rapidly. He was subject to an NWA blackballing to the point where he upset Karasik, and then he came back to the mainland U.S., and all of a sudden he's getting banned by every sports commission until it looks like he goes back to Hawaii and they make up. But by then, a lot of his athleticism is gone, and he's phased out. First, he's phased out in Canada in favor of Luther Lindsay and Bearcat Wright. And then he's phased out in Hawaii in favor of Bobo Brazil. And so in 1960, he commits suicide. And in 1957, Sweet Daddy Siki, who is not the original Reginald Siki by any means, who I think he's like 5'7", Claiborne was 6'1", but he basically steals Claiborne's entire repertoire and starts using it. And he's, I think, 17, 18 years old when he starts wrestling. Claiborne is 50. So Claiborne gets unceremoniously phased out. He commits suicide in 1960. Rufus Jones dies tragically in a car accident in 1951. And once that happened, it was truly open season on his gimmick. He dies in Ogden, Utah. And Don Kindred and Frank James are brought into the Pacific Northwest almost as a Rufus Jones tribute group, a tribute tag team. They're doing his both of them are doing his headbutting routine as a tag team. Really, the only difference there is Kindred was also pile driving people after he gave them the headbutts. And they win the Rocky Mountain Tag Team Championship, and they win the Pacific Northwest Tag Team titles simultaneously, and become the first all-black tag team to win any race-neutral tag team championship that I can find anywhere. And that's in 1953. And then the next year, Jack Claiborne heads into Canada. They team him with Luther Lindsay. They win the Canadian Tag Team Championship together. They're the first black babyface tag team to win a race-neutral tag team championship. And then they drop the titles, and then Claiborne gets phased out of that team in favor of Bearcat Wright, who's a whole lot younger, and gets brought in. I think Bearcat Wright, I think he was born in 1932, which would mean he was born the year Claiborne started wrestling. But okay, so I gave you what I thought was the necessity for that book.
Right.
The difficulty is you can't write that book while making any sorts of claims about who was the first one to do anything where, unless you know what everyone was doing. Otherwise, you're just flat out guessing, or worst, you're making it up. So in the process of working on that book, I'm simultaneously researching Vero Small in the 1880s, Clarence Bolden, who until A Decided Novelty came out and the Ringer published my piece, nobody knew with certainty, except his family members, that he was half black. And this is the guy that Frank Gotch in 1905 was declaring to be the best pound-for-pound wrestler in the world, as the simultaneous world middleweight and world light heavyweight champion. He's in every document in Missouri as black, living with his black wife and his black mother-in-law and his black brother-in-law in a black neighborhood. And then and also getting in trouble with the law in the newspaper with his brother, and identified black there, although they also say that he's so light that he could easily pass for white. And you see where this is going. He goes to Cleveland, and he's billed as the Cuban Wonder to explain why he's slightly darker than the average white wrestler. And he goes on and wins these two world titles. And then he gets injured. There's also a scandal there, but he gets injured. He disappears from the sport, and nobody knows that this multi-time world champion from like 1905 to 1907, who Frank Gotch called the best pound-for-pound wrestler in the world, nobody knows that he's legally black in most states. So you need to know these things. We didn't know that Joseph Alvin Godfrey, who was Rufus Jones, was also Ed Flowers, who wrestled in the Black Panther Ed Flowers, who wrestled in Massachusetts in 1933, won the World Middleweight Championship there in his rookie year of wrestling, goes on to New York, wrestles as Tiger Flowers Johnstone, and sculptress Emily Winthrop Miles sculpts a bust of him that is now on display in the Harvard museums, and they'd never been able to identify who it was until now.
Wow.
And then he goes on to become Rufus Jones. No one had ever put together that Tiger Flowers and Rufus Jones were the same guy, even though he wasn't exactly going out of his way to hide it. But unless you actually sat down and devoted weeks of time to researching this, you wouldn't have figured it out. So as I'm making what could have been a short story very long, but I'm trying to impress upon you and whoever's listening to this rant why it's important to gather all of this information so that we're not just making guesses. I was putting together, depending on the length of the wrestler's career or their significance, I was putting together from 2,000 words to 15,000 words on each of these guys' careers, and then blending them together chronologically so that you know that when Reginald Siki, the original, the real one, is finally getting his shot as the California state champion for the first time in his career in 1947, that Don Kindred and Don Blackman are really breaking the color line in Virginia as the first competent black wrestlers being brought in, and now they're allowing black fans in the balcony to view it because, of course, they'd like to make money from them too. And then Kindred's not available, so the next year, Don Blackman is touring Alabama and Mississippi and other states with his in the deep South with his all black wrestling group that includes the Black Panther Alex Kaffner and Frank James, who winds up on the team with Don Kindred later, and also with Buddy Jackson. And then later, Don Blackman and Buddy Jackson are the first wrestlers that Jim Crockett Sr. brings into North and South Carolina as his black versus black wrestler attraction. So it's important to know what's going on with this guy in California and this guy in Oregon, while these other guys are involved in the breaking of the color line in the South.
That is amazing. And with you telling this story and breaking it down, the thing that stuck in my head, and I knew when they made the announcement it was wrong, but most people will always say the first recognized black world heavyweight champion is Ron Simmons.
Yeah, it all depends. This is where wrestling is weird because it's very easy to have your cake and eat it too. If Vero Small in probably 85, give or take 5 to 7 years, was wrestling somewhere in Philadelphia, I believe it was Pennsylvania or New Jersey, and he was advertised as world champion, and he's black, and this is the late 19th century. Now, is it a world champion just because he showed up to do a signing and make an appearance and someone said he's the world champion? I would say no. Somebody might say yes. Now, Clarence Bolden would have a stronger claim because he's world middleweight and world light heavyweight champion simultaneously, 1905 to 1907. But if he was going out of his way not to appear that he was black, and nobody knew he was black, so we can't properly honor him or venerate him in the time when it was actually occurring, did it really happen? Yes and no. And also, most of the wrestling he was doing was confined to, as world champion, it was confined to excuse me, primarily Minnesota and Ohio. Then you get 1933, you get Joe Alvin Godfrey wrestling as Ed Flowers. He's wrestling for Charlie Gordon, who was probably the number 2 promotion in Massachusetts, running the number 2 promotion in Massachusetts at the time. He's the world middleweight champion. A lot of people would want to dismiss that out of hand because it's not a heavyweight championship, until you realize that in a lot of these territories, the top title in the era was either the middleweight or light heavyweight championship, because in the Depression era, people weren't all that heavy. Wrestling was more closely aligned with boxing, and people could sort of eyeball them and say, that guy's not a heavyweight, that guy's a middleweight. But again, in a lot of these territories, the middleweight and light heavyweight titles were the main titles, if not the only titles. If you want a world heavyweight champion, you've got George Hardison, who wrestles as Sealy Samara, who comes into Gordon's territory in Boston in 37, very late in 37. He doesn't beat anybody. Gordon just introduces him as the world heavyweight champion. And immediately, within 3 months, Gordon makes a deal with the other territories in the area that they're going to collaborate. But in the midst of making that deal, Gordon has to stop promoting Sealy Samara as a world heavyweight champion. So he doesn't lose the title. They just stop referring to him as the champion. And then he wrestles against Crusher Casey in the Boston Garden and gets completely destroyed. And then no one refers to Sealy Samara as a world heavyweight champion ever again. But then he goes to Montreal in 1939, and he has 2 reigns as the world junior heavyweight champion in Montreal in a 4 to 5 month period. So as far as I'm concerned, but these are, when we talk about these being world championships, these are pretty much isolated to a single city. And it was up to the promoter, for the most part, to name his top belt whatever he wanted to call it. So by the time we get to Jack Claiborne in Hawaii, I don't know that there was anything stopping, because this is pre-National Wrestling Alliance. I don't know that there was anything stopping Al Karasik from referring to the Hawaii junior heavyweight title as a world championship. And honestly, it's probably the most iconic belt of the era because it was co-promoted by Ring Magazine. So it's got the beautiful Ring Magazine logo on it. And Claiborne has 1 championship reign there, and it lasts almost 365 days. I think it was like 347 days or something like that. It's an unprecedented length for it's an unprecedented reign for a black champion anywhere in any wrestling territory, almost as long as all other reigns by all identifiably black wrestlers combined up until that point. So, I mean, now we're debating Hawaii Championship, World Championship. Is it just semantics? It was a major title and Claiborne held it for almost a year. Should we be giving that more credit? And then you have Bearcat Wright and you have Bobo Brazil, who are holding world titles in the 60s in Los Angeles for WWA. Ron Simmons can claim that he is the first black world heavyweight champion of a national wrestling territory that was on national television. So if you want to make all of those distinctions, you can, but you have to put a whole bunch of asterisks next to it in order to reach that conclusion.
Right. I know, especially back then, I was in my early teens, so a lot of people stuck out. But one person that was very famous and doesn't get the credit, I believe, and the love is he wrestled in Texas with the Von Erichs.
Iceman King Parsons.
Iceman King Parsons. And he was, if you look at it, he was legitimately a world heavyweight champion because he won their title right after they split from the NWA.
Yeah. And people will tell you, I'd forgotten about that. And this is where people would make the argument that was it really national television? I mean, the program was syndicated in some places. May have been syndicated in enough places that it might satisfy some people's requirement for that.
Right.
Were they wrestling with much regularity outside of the state of Texas? No, but neither were Bearcat Wright and Bobo Brazil wrestling outside the state of California.
Right.
And people usually give them credit for being inaugural black world champions. So, yeah, give Iceman King Parsons credit.
It's amazing when, like you said, when you're doing research and learning about wrestlers and different areas and things. One thing, especially for me, being, I call myself born in the territorial days. Any territory could claim to have a world heavyweight champion.
Yeah.
And I always hated that fact because my philosophy is, how can you be or claim to be a world heavyweight champion when you don't even leave a state? I mean, that, and I get the ideal of using the world heavyweight championship name because you want to make your title prestigious. But in the same token, especially nowadays, as smart as wrestling fans are, and we have internet and all that good jazz, if you don't defend your title outside of these three cities, you might as well call yourself that region's champion.
See, I agree, but then where I would push back on that gently is I'm not a huge boxing fan right now, but in the past I have been. And so when you look at the Klitschko's, for instance, when they were dominating the heavyweight scene, they never left Europe. They were the world champions, but they never left the European continent in order to. It was like they hijacked the titles and just kept them over there for an eternity. Anthony Joshua, world champion, took forever to get him to fight outside of the United Kingdom. and look what happened to him when he did. But I'm sure there have been contracts that had exclusive network deals and other things that ensured that they only fought in Las Vegas, but they were world champions. But, by the same token, pro wrestling isn't boxing, and we have different requirements for what we consider to be a world champion in each sport or entertainment brand.
Very much so. And another one that, and I guess me trying to be a purist, but also understanding the sport as what it is. Another one of those things that kind of bother me is you have a television champion, but you don't have any national television deal. You don't even have a local television deal. That I guess for me, I try to take it with a grain of salt, but I hate when I get into a disagreement or argument with somebody like, "Oh, they did this." Really? You're gonna count that?
Yeah, I mean, now when you start getting into semantics with the championships, I mean, if all of the if all of a wrestling promotion's events are simply streaming on YouTube, I mean, why don't you just call it the YouTube champion? Because that's what it really is. But by the same token, even if I have it set up in a warehouse and it's streaming worldwide, is it now fair to say that they're a world champion? I don't know. I don't know what the rules are anymore.
Well, I had no idea this. Like with any other sport, you can sit and go back and forth with so much things.
Yeah, this is why I now primarily confine myself to researching pro wrestling in the past, because at least the past is set in stone and it, for the most part, is a whole lot tidier.
Yes, and especially if you're doing the research, you can make a very good argument on claims, because some people just talk out the side of their necks when it comes to what they know. And again, I do not call myself professor because I claim to know everything in wrestling. I was given the moniker, so just that you know.
Oh, look, I've told my wife, she's she is a dietitian at Duke University, but she also teaches college courses from time to time, so adjunct professorship. I've told her that if I taught a single online class once in my life, even if it was for a day, I would insist that people call me professor every day for the rest of my life. So I don't fault you for claiming that title at all.
And probably the funniest thing, one of my good friends, and he does Till 5 wrestling. The first time he ever met me, he's like, "You're not a professor, and you're damn sure not a bear, so I'm not calling you that." I'm like, "Oh, wait. My daughter calls me a bear. That makes me a bear.
Mm-hmm.
My teammates call me the professor. So I am Professor Bear. Until you can have a good argument that I'm not, I will be Professor Bear."
Hey, Dr. Dre and Dr. J have both proudly held the doctor title, and I don't see too many people trying to strip them of it.
Very much so. Very much so. Well, oh my goodness. This has been such an amazing interview. We've got to have you on again so we can have a longer discussion, because I think there's so much I really would love to hear and get into, but this has been fantastic. And I would go ahead.
I was going to say, same here, Professor Bear. And whenever you'd like to have me on again, it would be an honor.
Man, I think it not only this is I almost want to say this is a classroom education that if you're not a wrestler fan, you will be, and even if you're not, you will end up, because now I'm already in my head. Okay, I need to go get his books. I need to look into this. I didn't know that. The main thing that hit me so hard was when you said Rufus Jones. The first thing that came to my head was Rufus R. Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, he was a world champion. Then I'm like, holy crap. Now I have to go read more about this and see how they correlate, if there are any correlations. It's just very heartwarming, and plus just learning different things is great.
If you really want your mind blown, Rufus R. Jones was probably the fourth Rufus Jones.
Oh my goodness. See, and it was so much easier back then because it didn't have media.
Mm-hmm.
And you could get away with so much and do so much.
Yeah. There was during World War II, there was a fake Gorilla Parker wrestling in the South. There was probably a fake King Kong Clayton wrestling in Utah when the real King Kong Clayton got drafted. And after Jack Claiborne commits suicide, there was a Black Canadian wrestler who wrestled as Jack Claiborne Jr. Over in Australia, which is a place where the original Jack Claiborne was very popular. So yes, you had a whole bunch of gimmick infringement and stealing of names going on.
But hey, that's part of, as I like to call it, the magic of pro wrestling. Well, again, I really thank you for coming on and educating the professor and educating the fans. I know the fans are going to be asking for you to come back very, very soon.
I'd be happy to come back. And in the meantime, I'm going to head over to Chops Cards and order myself something nice.
That's cool. One more thing, and then I will let you go.
Sure.
So I know you don't want to give any real spoilers to what you're doing currently, but do you have I guess I ask it this way. How long do you think you will be continuing making wrestling books?
I would love to quit. I would love to quit. I'd love to be done then.
Don't go shooting all the
All right. Well, hey, please don't quit too soon, because I'm probably going to have more questions.
You know what? I appreciate that, but I think 11 books is enough. It's time for me to find something else to do with my life.
Well, Ivan, once again, thank you so much for blessing me and my audience with your presence. Hope continued success, and I can guarantee you by the end of this year, I will have numerous of your books at my house. So thank you.
I appreciate it, buddy. Thanks so much, Professor Bear.
All right, guys, girls, thank you so much for again joining us. And again, I hope you had as much fun as I did learning. And please go make sure you support this gentleman. He has so much great wrestling knowledge that we can learn, and it translates over to today's wrestling, and you'll be very surprised on that. But again, well, with my guest, Ivan, I am Professor Bear, and this has been A Bear's Thought. Thank you so much. Everything I do is for the ones I love and miss.